All right, this video is going to be a walkthrough passage live. I'm going to do some live cooking here. I'm going to do an 8-question passage and just going to implement some of the strategies that I talk about in the other video and videos. So yeah, let's just jump right in. I'm going to make an 8-question passage. You're never going to have an 8-question passage on the MCAT, but it's just good practice just to show you. The AAMC has some 8-question passages as well in their study sets. Okay, so for this walkthrough, I'm just going to actually just read it out loud, and I'm not going to pay attention to time. This is just to go through at a slower pace my systems of how to tackle the passages. Okay, I have to actually restart here because I was reading out loud, and then I realized I can't read this out loud and understand it at the same time. So I read the passage first. Now I'm going to read it to you now that I've read it. And then I'll answer the questions live. So let's do that. So let's get started. Street murals are generally concerned with collective expression and societal commentary, particularly in circumstances where overt means of communication are harshly restricted. So just so you guys know, I kind of talk about this, of course, in my other video, and I do this in my study with me's. Although I do it mentally, I don't actually write this down, but for the demonstration of the video, I would just want to show you what's going on through my head when I'm tackling a passage. So first things first, we're talking here right off the bat, and this is a very common pattern with the AAMC passages. You have the first sentence demonstrating a lot of value. Like if you're going to put weight on what is the most important sentence to read, it's usually the first sentence of the first paragraph, or the last sentence of the first paragraph is also usually it. I'd say those are like the top two, and then of course you have first sentence of the last paragraph and the last sentence of the last paragraph. Those are like the heaviest weighted main idea sentences or sections to really pay attention to. And so I spend a lot of time on the first paragraph. Like I spend a lot of time on it because a lot of people will want to fly through the rest of the passage, and if you understand this first paragraph, you're going to see why it's so important. So first sentence starts talking about collective expression and societal commentary. So, and then it's talking about street murals. Interesting. So if I were to show you what I have in my mind map, right? And I hope you guys can see this. Yeah. Street murals, okay, is a function of what? Essentially society and collectivism, right? Which really could be grouped into the same main idea, but street murals, which are a form of art, are a function of these two things. That's immediately what comes to mind. Now, let's keep going. Particularly in circumstances where overt means of communication are harshly restricted. So the AAMC always does this. They will not always tell you what it is outright. They use the word overt. They use the word overt means of communication, which is essentially their way of saying art, because that's what an overt means of communication even is. That's art. Okay. So that's kind of the part with these passages that is a little tricky, is sometimes you just have to know these definitions, unfortunately. This overt is kind of a psychology term on the MCAT anyways, but you do kind of have to at least use some context clues that they're referring to street murals here when they talk about overt means of communication. So they're saying that these street murals are harshly restricted. So this, guys, is my initial mind map. Okay. As you can see, I have society and collectivism contributing to art, which is being restricted. Your mind map should be, this is actually kind of perfect in my view of it. And I just say that because it follows principles of what makes a good mind map. And these principles are that where's the camera? There's 3 to 4 main ideas, and that's it. You don't want to go too crazy and have like a spider web, okay? You have 3 to 4 main ideas, and that's your mind map. And I literally am envisioning this in my head when I'm reading the first paragraph and the rest of the passage and the entire question set. And now you can imagine like this, you don't just come up with this right away. That's why I spend some good amount of time on this first paragraph to develop this, because now that I have this, watch what happens next. So now I have this main idea that society, collectivism, contribute to art, and the meaning of art, and that art is being restricted. Okay, let's keep going. So under this person in Chile, harsh censorships, policies, and a climate of fear led artists and activists to turn to public walls as their most visible platform. AKA, this is a good example of the visible platform is a good example of the AAMC being considerate to the fact that you might not know what certain words mean. And so there's a lot of times, if you don't know what a word means, you have to read a little either before or after it and use those context clues to derive its meaning. So like overt, you can derive the meaning by visible platform after the word is used in the next sentence, and then also before the word is used where it's talking about art. Okay, those are 2 ways of understanding like, oh, maybe overt means something visually, something visual, which it does. So let's see what overt means. Shown openly, plainly or readily, apparent, not secret or hidden, right? So, okay. Let's keep going. That's a little tidbit right there. So these murals served not merely as aesthetic projects, but as deliberate acts of resistance designed to challenge official narratives and to assert the people's emotional and political realities. So once again, this art is a function of social and collective ideals. Hey guys, we made this mind map with the first sentence, and we already are 1, 2, 3 sentences in, 3 long sentences. Okay, first paragraph. But from the first sentence, in terms of the weight of the importance of that first sentence gave us the structure for what you're about to see being the entire passage. Let's keep going. The emphasis on the broader socio-political function of murals is reflected in the way that imagery and messages were designed to evoke unity and spark dialogue. Okay, once again, we're seeing a pattern here, socio-political. Okay, we have that, right? And then a function of murals. They even say it's a function of murals. Okay, we have that. It's reflected in the way that imagery and messages were designed to evoke unity and spark dialogue, which is certainly a function of society and collectivism, like collective thought, at least. Okay, in some of these works, bold colors were used in geometric patterns to call attention to injustices, while in others, text demanded accountability from an authoritarian government. So, this is my mind map. This is what I'm thinking of when I'm reading this passage. Because I'm drawing, I'm tempted. I don't usually draw these mind maps. Once again, I'm thinking of them mentally. Because I'm drawing, I am tempted to write like art as a form of text and as a form of like color. Bold color and text as a form of functions of the art. But reading this passage, like I wouldn't think about that as far as a mind mappable thing in your head. Okay, so let's keep going. So to call to injustices, authoritarian government, which is interesting because once again, we're restricting the murals. So we could assume here that this is like the government, authoritarian. And you can see that I just put government. So once again, the main mind map is still sticking. Let's keep going. Indeed, The layered hues and stirring motifs underscore how visual art can be a medium through which collective aspirations flourish in spite of political barriers. These phrases are just like, essentially what's happening here is you have the AAMC regurgitating the same main idea over and over and over and over again, and they're changing the phrasing and the wording of it to try and trip you up and to blur the message in a way. So that's kind of what they're doing. And so this is just goes to show why spending more time on that first sentence can get you through all this fluff way faster. Let's keep going. One persistent belief among many Chilean muralists of the time was that art carries an innate power to galvanize social consciousness. So, once again, we're talking to the power of society, which is on our mind map. Let's keep going. If this were not the case, the argument goes, oppressive regimes would not invest so many resources in suppressing or destroying these murals. Once again, represented on the mind map. Let's keep going. Thus, these public creations took on outsized significance during Pinochet's rule. The ephemeral nature of the images stood in tension with their potent call for freedom of expression. Once again, on the mind map, let's keep going. The ephemeral quality notwithstanding, the messages themselves, justice, solidarity, and shared struggle, remained in the minds of observers. So, essentially saying that the people who viewed this art felt these collective ideals. Once again on the mind map. Let's keep going. There is, however, a challenging question. So these are important. Like you want to, when the author starts talking about challenges or critics or they bring outside viewpoints, you want to pay more attention to these. So like these first three paragraphs are all the same thing. This paragraph, I want to see who's the challenger. So at the core of this viewpoint, so how can a population under severe repression manage to retain a creative spirit potent enough to risk open defiance? So they're saying like, these street muralists are being repressed, and yet how are they able to maintain the creativity and the spirit to risk, this open defiance that could get them in trouble? Despite threats, they say, the author says, many artists returned time and time again to repaint walls that had been whitewashed by the regime's forces. Because the government, is restricting the murals, once again, on my map. The repeated destruction and subsequent reemergence of certain motifs prompted debate on whether ephemeral protests can meaningfully erode a government's control or merely provide fleeting solace to a beleaguered citizenry. Okay, so this is interesting. Essentially, they're wondering, the challenge of the question is, how does the restriction of the art not restrict the artists? Like, how did they keep going, Okay. So one response to this dilemma comes from organizing principles of groups like the Brigada Romana Para, which use clandestine methods to create large-scale murals. Okay, what does that mean? Their strategy was both instructional and participatory. Okay, so new members learned to paint quickly and efficiently, often late at night, so that multiple images would be scattered across the city before authorities could intervene. This systemic approach not only spread the group's ideas, but also taught novices the practical skills needed to communicate bold messages of dissent. So essentially, the repression was fought from the government by speed. Okay, so speed and kind of like teachings, like collective teachings, which contributes to like the main idea. And so, by the way, although I'm drawing this out, let me be very clear. My mind map in my head when I'm reading this is still just four things: society, collectivism, leading to art, street murals, which is being repressed, This fluff right here doesn't really matter. I'm not going to think about that. I'm just drawing it out because I have a piece of paper here. Why not? We have some time. And then these things here, once again, I'm drawing them out. They're kind of minor, but it'll help a little bit. Okay, so, yep, taught the novices practical skills needed. Okay, communicate bold messages of dissent. All right, next. In grappling with further questions about how these street murals maintained momentum, the role of community gatherings, collaboration, and shared resources became paramount. It's almost like society and collectivism is contributing to the art, something we read in the very first sentence. And now we're 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs in, and it's the same thing being regurgitated. Okay. Indeed, the sense of unity was central to the Brigada's success, for it affirmed that no single artist needed to rely on talent alone. Once again, no need for independence for these artists. They're helping each other. They're teaching each other. They're collective, okay? This communal practice is what they say. And willingness to endure the potential risks enabled diverse individuals to contribute. Hence, the capacity to resist censorship was not so much a solitary gift, okay, but a collective endeavor shaped by mutual support and risk-taking. And, me personally, what's solitary mean again? Like, solace, solitude, like, I kind of know what that word means, but once again, here's another, place where that tip at the beginning of this video comes in of use your context clues. Like, solitary gift, I might not know what that means, but it says but, which is a contrast word, and then it says collective endeavor. So then the opposite of collective endeavor might be individualism. And then if you look up what solitary means, it's, done or existing alone. So use your context clues. Let's keep going. So capacity to resist censorship was, collective. Okay. Good thing we have that. Last paragraph. A paradox remains if the collective spirit is crucial to bridging the gap between personal frustration and public defiance. Where does that spirit originate? Is it purely the product of seeing injustice firsthand, or must there be some pre-existing impulses that guide individuals towards such activism? Okay, this is a new thought. This is like the author bringing in kind of a new idea. And this kind of touches on what I said earlier of like the first paragraph and the last paragraph are the most important. And this is why, because the rest of it, the rest of the passage is just fluff around the main idea of the first and last paragraph. But the last paragraph here is telling us something new. It's like, okay, this injustice, the art is a product of the injustice, or is there like some pre-existing impulse that guides the individuals towards this activism that they have? So these questions continue to hover at the boundaries of street art scholarship, suggesting that while the Chilean murals undeniably testified to courage and unity, okay, there might always be a deeper, unresolved inquiry into what ignites and replenishes. The will to speak out when doing so could result in personal harm. So how are they, what's driving them to do this, especially with the risk of the government interfering? It's just something the author posits. Okay, so now let's tackle the questions, finally. Which of the following scenarios, and I'm doing these questions live. I did read the passage beforehand because I can't read out loud and comprehend it. So I read the passage, I gave you the rundown. Let's do the questions live. So which of the following scenarios is most in accord with the discussion about the role of public murals under Pinochet's regime? Now remember Pinochet's regime here. You can see that it was mentioned, blah, 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 blah. I think it was up here. Authoritarian government. Or no. Next paragraph. Oh, here it is. Pinochet's rule. Ephemeral nature. Okay. So the art took an outsized significance during Pinochet's rule. Okay. So when we're talking about Pinochet's rule and the role of the public murals, which one of the answer choices is most in alignment with the discussion of that? An artist creates a brightly colored mural demanding justice. Officials praise the message and commission more such works. Well, that wouldn't make sense because why? So this is the beauty of the mind map, guys. If you have the mind map and you're thinking of the mind map when you're reading the question and you're reading the answer choices, then you're remembering that, well, hold on. That government official was restricting the art. And so this part of the answer choice, officials praising the art, is wrong. And when one part of the answer choice is wrong, the entire answer choice is wrong. Even though this part of it is correct, that is true, this is wrong. So now the whole thing is wrong. Okay. Next, a group of young volunteers paint a mural criticizing government brutality. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Only to have it whitewashed, prompting them to repaint it at night. That makes sense. Yep, that's in alignment. Okay. Now, the question is saying most, so there could be, technically a couple right answers in these types of questions, but you want to find the one that's most in accord with the discussion. Okay, let's keep going. An artist proposes a neutral image of flowers. Really? Neutral. Okay. Local authorities sponsor it? No. Okay, so we crossed that one out. A collective of painters meets openly in a state-run gallery to craft gentle portrayals of daily life under the dictatorship. Collective of painters in a state meets openly, okay? A state-run gallery to craft gentle portrayals of daily life under the dictatorship. Well, I remember they used the word bold, right? And I kind of had that somewhere here. I had art. I remember they said like bold text, right? And like vibrant colors. So that would be wrong. So the answer is B. Let's see. Am I right? I'm right. Let's keep going. According to the passage, one unresolved problem related to Chilean muralism under Pinochet is that so the one unresolved problem, remember, there's something over here. What response to this dilemma? A challenging question, right? Is that how can a population under severe repression manage to retain a creative spirit potent enough to risk open defiance? Okay. So, one unresolved problem related to Chilean murals under Pinochet is that the public could not see the finished murals without official approval from government censors. That's not true. In many instances, creating art in a climate of fear might not produce lasting political change. That's kind of true. I want to keep reading on. People do not risk personal harm for the sake of expressing political messages through art. Yeah, that's a little extreme. It's more so positing how can a population under severe, repression manage to create, retain a creative spirit. So, yeah, that's not it. And then only professional artists possessed sufficient skill to paint meaningful images on city walls. That's not true because they taught them how to do it speedily and in teachings. Well, hold on. Let me rethink this. I am live. Only professional artists. Okay, so they're asking about the one unresolved problem related to Chilean muralism. And this one, so this is actually important that I read that because I caught myself here. I need to clear this. I think it clears everything. So I'm glad I caught this. This is a little tricky. So they're saying the one unresolved problem, okay? There's a challenging question in the passage, right? A challenging viewpoint, but this goes to get resolved. later. There's like a refusion of that argument. Um, so that's actually resolved. But the real question, still a paradox remains. That's the last paragraph. So that's the one unresolved problem. And so according to that is if this collective spirit is crucial to bridging the gap between personal frustration and public defiance, from where does that spirit originate? Is it purely the product of seeing injustice firsthand? Or are there pre-existing impulses that guide individuals towards such activism? These questions continue to hover, suggesting that while Chilean murals undeniably testified to courage and unity, there might always be a deeper, unresolved inquiry into what ignites and replenishes the will to speak out when doing so could result in personal harm. So, it's not about sufficient skill. It's C. People do not risk personal harm for the sake of expressing political messages through art. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. This one is B is false. That doesn't say anything related to the last paragraph. And then A is not related. So I actually think it's C, guys. I think it's C. I'm going to put a high. Oh, it was B. So I psyched myself out. This is why I'm not at a perfect score yet. I'm showing my journey, showing my thought process, and I'm going to learn from this too. Yeah, I think C is too extreme. Passage specifically indicates that many people did risk personal harm. That's true. Yeah. But it's tough because it's like pondering. It's pondering. How did they have the will to speak out? See, too much time on this. All right. The passage discussion of bold colors and text and murals on paragraph 2 is used primarily as evidence that most artists chose subdued imagery to hide messages from government. Nope, that's not it. The ephemeral nature of murals made the messages easily forgotten by the public. Maybe. Yeah. Definitely C. So the reason for that is the imagery and design work together to challenge official narratives in a highly visible way. Art is highly visible. It's on our mind map. Imagery and color, text, that aligns with my mind map. And by the way, actually, let's go back to question 2 real quick because I got it wrong. I'm not going to get another question wrong on this. I can't. So the unresolved problem related to Chilean muralism, I keep saying the word wrong, I know. People do not risk personal harm for the sake of expressing political messages through art. Obviously, that was refuted in the passage. I should not have missed that. I should have just trusted my gut, which was B. In many instances, creating art in a climate of fear might not produce lasting political change. That is not necessarily reflected in my mind map, but this is more of like a kind of obviously a reasoning within the text question. It says it's comprehension. So, yeah, I don't like that. That's okay. Question 4. Which of the following statements, if true, would best resolve the problem raised in paragraph 4, 2, 3, 4, about whether ephemeral protests can erode government control? What was the problem? Oh, yeah. So essentially, the artists are painting openly and defiantly. They're trying to do it quickly. How did they, first of all, remain creative enough? And then also, how did they do this quickly enough at such scale, because it's constantly getting restricted and taken down? So if true, which of these would best resolve the problem about whether ephemeral protests can erode government control? All murals, even those critical of the regime, were required to be officially cataloged by state institutions. Oh. If they had to be officially cataloged by the state institutions, that would solve the ephemeral problem. Because the problem is an ephemeral problem, aka fleeting, right? They put up these imagery and then it's taken down. Okay. The repeated act of repainting murals significantly elevated public morale and solidarity, sustaining opposition to the regime. The problem that they're bringing up is whether it can meaningfully erode government's control. So that's interesting. Public support for mural art waned as soon as the government offered safer official art exhibits. No, not relevant. Authorities actually allowed some murals to remain, but strictly forbade references to political figures. No, that wouldn't resolve anything. So if the murals, even if they're critical of the regime, if they're required to be officially cataloged by the state institutions, that could meaningfully erode their control, couldn't it? But what if the repeated act of repainting murals elevated public morale and solidarity, sustaining opposition to the regime? Just because you're sustaining opposition doesn't mean you're eroding their control. So it's not B, I think it's A. Damn. Your boy's struggling today. Okay. Learning in public. All right. According to the passage, activists viewed the destruction of murals under Pinochet primarily as evidence that messages were too equipped to be understood by the general public. That's not true, because they were social forces not interested. That's not true. This is true. That's not true. Let's see. Oh, let me check. Yep. In the final paragraph, the author seems to assume... Okay, final paragraph. Author seems to assume that individuals cannot be motivated to protest unless they have artistic ability. That's not true. Mural art inevitably leads to violent confrontation with authorities. That's not true. This is true. That's not true. C is true. It literally says that in the last paragraph where it says, you know, what is it? Is there a deeper unresolved inquiry into what ignites and replenishes the will to speak out when doing so could result in personal harm? That makes perfect sense. All right, question 7. Assume that a collective of formerly apolitical citizens became engaged in clandestine mural painting after witnessing brutalities by the regime. This information most strongly supports that passage view. Okay, so if you were formerly apolitical and you became engaged in clandestine mural painting after witnessing brutalities, then this would support the passage view that not B, because that has nothing to do with skill. Okay, it's like emotional charge. Government leniency towards street art. No, that's not true. C is irrelevant. Let's look at D. D is not true. It's not talking about outsiders here. The obvious answer is A. I think that's pretty simple. Last question. Given the information in the passage, it is reasonable to conclude that many muralists might hold repressive forces accountable for suppressing dissent because those forces could have stopped the artist from painting but chose not to intervene. Okay, so given the information in the passage, it is reasonable to conclude that many muralists might hold repressive forces accountable for suppressing dissent because those forces could have stopped the artist from painting but chose not to intervene at all. That's not true. The forces were intervening. We have that in our mind map. Did not officially recognize the Brigada Romana Para as a legitimate art group. No. Attempted to extinguish the communal capacity to transform public spaces into outlets of defiance. That's exactly what the suppressing forces did, so that is the correct answer. Cool. So, guys, that was it. I disagree with a couple of the answer choices, but my opinion doesn't matter because it's the test makers at the end of the day that make the rules. So that's like a 126, 75% accuracy. That's okay. So what I would say is, by the way, question 2, people do not, according to the passage, one unresolved problem related to the Chilean muralism under Pinochet is that in many cases creating art in a climate of fear might not produce lasting political change. That makes intuitive sense, and this is why it's important to go over your answers. It's more so that, like, I didn't understand what this answer choice was saying, so I defaulted to C. But it's not like I actually gave C enough thought to think that it was the right answer anyway. So don't let your biases kill you. Also, I do think that kind of going slower through the passages for some reason is making me overthink them, in terms of the questions at least. So when I have the time factor, I think I need to do this timed. I need to do a live one of these timed, but then I can't talk through it. That's okay. And then this question I got wrong. Which of the following statements, if true, would resolve the problem raised in paragraph 4 about whether ephemeral protests can erode government control? If the repeated act of repainting murals elevated public morale and solidarity, sustaining opposition to the regime, then that would resolve. This one, A, that I selected, if that were true, that the murals critical of regime were required to officially be cataloged by state institutions, I feel like that erodes the government control in terms of their restriction of it. So I don't know. Let's ask AI. Let's see. If the murals were required to be officially cataloged by state institutions, wouldn't that erode the restriction of control from the government, thus eroding government control? And then I'm going to say sustaining opposition in B doesn't mean that you're eroding. If this was on their test, sometimes AMC gives you like test questions that are not going to be scored. This is one of them, bro. All right, you're focusing on how cataloging might affect control, but the question asks which best resolves the problem of whether ephemeral protests, which are short-lived murals, can erode government control. So it's asking about the short. See, you have to read the question so carefully. the short lifespan of the painting in and of itself, can that erode government control? And the answer is, if you pick A, you're no longer asking about the short lifespan of the art. You're asking about the long-term lifespan, whereas answer B points to the short lifespan, aka the repeated act. Makes sense. Okay. All right, guys. Well, there you have it. This was a walkthrough live. I tried my best. I gave my explanations. I think I ended up taking like an hour reading that, talking through it, answering the questions, just because it takes longer when you're kind of explaining your thoughts out loud and reading everything out loud. But this is a learning process for me as well. I'm by no means an expert yet. I hope to be, but I'm sharing my journey along the way, and make some humble mistakes here and there, learn from it, grow from it, make sure that you're consistent, and hopefully these tips helped you guys. Implement them. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of the mind mapping strategy, and I hope that helps you. All right, till the next one. Bye-bye.